Hi, my name is Trevor Maxwell, and I broke into data with no prior experience and no degree. Prior to that, I was a technician for industrial printers for 7 years.
Welcome to the Data Career Podcast, the podcast that helps aspiring data professionals land their next data job. Here's your host, Avery Smith.
Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Love being here.
I'm excited that you're here because your data journey, we were just talking before we started recording, your data journey kind of started on this podcast, which is really fun. And now you're here, which is kind of coming full circle, I feel like.
Yeah, it totally is. I think I didn't even know that I could break into data before I started following your podcast. I think your podcast did such a good job when I was searching podcasts on Spotify of I just want to learn about data, learn about the industry. And because your podcast was so much about breaking into data, it helped solidify in my mind that I was like, I think I can do this. Maybe I can make this
Wow.
happen.
Well, you did make it happen. You are now a technical business analyst for a vet tech company. You're completely remote. But before this, you had really no tech experience at all, right?
No, I didn't have a single tech job in the past. When I think back to my very first job, I worked in construction, road construction. I was digging holes. Most of the time it was in the rain. Sometimes it was night shift and it was freezing. After that, well, I always kind of worked in a restaurant because it was the easiest second job to have from 6 till midnight or super early in the morning. So started as a dishwasher. And once you have dishwashing experience, you can kind of go to any restaurant and work your way up to a prep cook, to a line cook. So probably over 8 years, probably worked in and out of different restaurants. Not much technical stuff going on there. And then I did land a job. For about 2 years, I think I was in manufacturing. And that's when I probably did my most schooling. I actually went to school and took electrical, took welding, just kind of a various bunch of stuff that all kind of accumulated to maybe an associate's degree, maybe not. I didn't really try to put it all down on paper, but it was like 2 years worth of education, mostly trade related stuff that basically just told me that's not what I wanted to do. So I keep working in manufacturing, and I went and found a different job in sales. It was like a customer service sales job, but that company had technicians. And because I was just always working with my hands, kind of used to fixing stuff, working with my hands, I guess, I was able to kind of apply and get promoted internally to this technician job and spent 7 years fixing industrial printers, kind of slowly getting more seniority, more skills as I went along. So that's a long way of saying before this job, I didn't do anything technical at all.
Yeah, hardly even a desk job. Maybe there for a second with the customer service thing, but the rest of it, you were on your feet, not really in an office environment. And now you work completely remote as a technical business analyst. And so, if that journey intrigues you as a listener, keep listening because we're going to break down how Trevor did it. And it was pretty exciting because we were actually talking, you first got interested in like data kind of on accident by getting interested in AI because, like you said, you were kind of like a construction worker, a technician, and you're like hearing about AI, but you like know nothing about it. And so when people are like, AI is going to take over the world, you're like, I want to figure this out. And so, you went to the library, got like AI for Dummies, the book. You took some Udemy courses about machine learning, but basically you got to a point where you're kind of absorbing a lot of like information, but not really making any traction in your job journey. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think that's totally fair. We were laughing about that because from construction on the outside, I remember thinking oh man, AI is going to take over the world and just not really knowing what that means or what that would look like. And I thought it's definitely worthwhile to learn what AI really is and what it's not. And I knew just how granular and how basic those books were, like the For Dummies books. They're actually really good books. If anyone's ever actually pulled one of those out, I don't remember if it was called AI for Dummies. There was definitely a book called Machine Learning for Dummies. And so I started learning Python as my first introduction to the data world, which was very challenging. And there was a lot of nights just staring at, I don't even know what, and just trying to figure out what I'm even looking at.
You were just looking at something, not exactly sure what you were doing. But then you kind of get, you're like, man, I really am interested in like some sort of like an AI career or some sort of data career, because one of the things that you had mentioned is they oftentimes prioritize your skill over your schooling. And like you said, you kind of had this eclectic collection of different classes that you had taken, in higher education, but certainly no real bachelor's degree and maybe an associate's degree. And so you're like, okay, I'm going to get into this. And that's where you found the Data Career Podcast. You ended up coming to one of the webinars I do about like how to break into the data world. And actually, I pulled up some of the comments you said. So this is actually exactly a year ago, basically. And one of the things that I show in that webinar is like a really cool way that you can apply for jobs and find like really fresh data jobs. And you said, "Oh wow, I'm doing this all wrong." And you had mentioned before, just before this call, that yeah, you were like applying on LinkedIn without a profile pic type of thing, right? Is that
That's
kind of what
right.
you're at?
Yeah, it's super funny to think about. Like, I remember the first like module of going through your course was just like how to set up your LinkedIn, which seems super basic now, but looking back for myself, that was like revolutionary. It felt like to me, like I was like, oh my gosh, look, this is my first introduction to like the digital world, because I really didn't use social media all that much, didn't need to, and a lot of people I knew didn't use it, and none of my jobs ever in the past used LinkedIn. So my face was just the little circle gray person. I had a LinkedIn account basically just to send out my resume, which I thought that's all I had to do. But yeah, for my previous experience, it would be like I would apply online to basically like random posts about construction jobs, or I would just go to different restaurants with my resume, like in person, and give people my resume. That was how I got jobs in the past. So applying online and competing online is a super different landscape.
Yeah, a whole new world, really. Anyway, so at this point, you're like, okay, maybe there's more to this whole networking thing other than just sending your job application. And so you actually end up signing up for the Data Analytics Accelerator. And it's so funny. One of your comments in that webinar, you said, "Okay, I signed up. It's a lot of money for us, but I feel like I'm at a point where I need to make changes in my life." And I love how powerful that statement is because, like, it isn't cheap to transform your career 100%. But I love what you said. I feel like I'm at a point where I need to make changes in my life. And if you have that feeling, like, you got to do something, and you definitely did something because now you're a technical business analyst. You obviously, when you're a technician or a line cook or a construction worker, it's pretty much impossible to work remotely. Now you work completely remotely. And one thing that's really cool about Trevor is he's a family man. He's got kids, he's got a wife, and your wife is able to stay at home with the kids now. So I think you made some changes in your life the last 365 days.
Yeah, I mean, I had no clue that when I made that statement that I was going to be able to change everything about my life, like in a positive way. And so grateful for that I stuck to it. So grateful I decided to do it, and just so grateful for your course. I mean, I think it was bang on for what I needed. So
Well, I'm grateful that you took the chance on yourself and you bet on yourself because, we're looking back 365 days later now, but you've actually had this job for about 6 months now. So you did it in about 6 months. And I actually wanted to share, I didn't really tell you I was going to do this, but Trevor recently posted on LinkedIn. We'll have Trevor's LinkedIn in the show notes down below so you guys can connect with him on LinkedIn. But one of the posts he said was, over a year ago, I decided that I wanted to completely overhaul my career and really focus on working with data. I spent many late evenings and most of my weekends studying for my career transition. I was filled with doubts. My emotions were all over the place. Some days I would stare at my computer screen, feeling stuck or frustrated, and ask myself, what am I doing? And I just want to pause and tell you this is what it looks like to land a data job. Like Trevor said, many late evenings, most of my weekends filled with doubts, emotions all over the place. I'm really guilty of, you know, I always try. I think too many people make landing a data job sound hard because they show that like these are the prerequisites. This is what you have to know. You have to know this. You have to know that. You have to know calculus. You have to know linear algebra. You have to have a bachelor's degree. You have to have a master's degree. And it pisses me off, frankly, because I'm like, no, you don't. And Trevor's proof of it. But sometimes I'm guilty of making it sound almost too easy, where it's like I make it feel like maybe that it's not going to take your weekends or it's not going to take your evenings or your emotions won't be all over the place. But it is. And sometimes you're looking and asking yourself, what am I doing? But Trevor's advice in this case was, however, I had a goal and I wanted to see through it. If you're out there and you're feeling weary, I hope you continue to fight for your goals too. I enjoy the work I do way more. I get to spend more time with my kids and my wife, and I have more opportunities which fill me with energy to continue growing. And I love that. I think that's so powerful because your journey was hard, and I'm sure there was times where you felt like giving up. But on the other end, are you glad that you didn't give up?
100%. I mean, everything in that post is true. It had been a long time since I posted something, and I feel like I'd been at my job a little while now that I was like, I wanted to be retrospective and post something that kind of talked about my journey. And I don't know what it is about the human experience where we can feel amazing one day and then feel super down the next day, like filled with doubt and anxiety and just feeling like it's not going to work out. I don't know what that is, but there was like day after day that I have to just put my frustrations and anxiety to rest and just like trust in like my plan. Or maybe it was just enough stubbornness that I just really wanted to change something that I was like, I'm just going to see this through for better or for worse. There has to be some level of that. Otherwise, it's really hard to keep going because you don't necessarily see results every day. It's not just fantastic, fun, great stuff every day. A lot of times it's just a grind, but it's totally worth it.
It is a grind sometimes. Let's talk a little bit more about what that grind actually looked like. So, in the end, you go through the boot camp, you're learning the skills. So, you had mentioned you had done some Python programming to start, which is always, in my opinion, a terrible idea, place to start in the data world, unless you're familiar with programming, because it's hard. It's my favorite data language. I can't get that across enough. Like, I love Python, but I don't really think if you're trying to land your first data job, you should even learn it at all, to be honest. If anything, just learn maybe the basics. But had you like touched on SQL before the boot camp?
No, heard SQL. I think I don't think I really used it a whole lot because I didn't really try to download any of the softwares you needed to use it. A lot of the online courses you can take, you can play with Python. I probably did some SQL stuff, but it's so impractical. It's hard to really know what I would use it for. It just seemed like a way to get the data. And you don't really have context of what SQL's for. So you're just like, okay, cool. Like I really feel like my journey was like working backwards. I was like, okay, there's AI. Don't understand that. Went down a level. Machine learning. Don't really understand that. Python. Oh, everything's built on Python. Let me try to understand this. This seems like there's some things in here that I understand. Okay, maybe not. I went down to like SQL and like databases and kind of like kept working my way backwards, I think, until I got to your course and was like, wait, I think I found the entry point of where I'm supposed to actually start.
100%. Yeah. I think, yeah, trying to break into machine learning, I think is a very difficult task. I think breaking into any data role is a difficult task. But yeah, machine learning and AI especially, definitely it gets exponentially harder at those points. So you found the right place, you found the right entry point, and you're learning all these skills. I don't know the answer to this, but I'll ask you anyways. With the projects that we build inside of the boot camp, was that like did you kind of did SQL kind of click when you were actually like, oh, I'm actually like hands on doing this, with something with a goal at the end of it?
Yeah, I think so. And actually, one of the hardest parts about the project is the write up. And for that reason, it's the most valuable. Being able to articulate what I was doing really put it all together for me. Like the fact that you say at the end of the project, you need to basically do like a write up summary, like describe the project to me, like pretend I'm your manager and explain your findings and stuff like that and just justify it with your SQL queries and all this kind of stuff. And it made me understand that the SQL query was a very tiny piece in like a big puzzle of analysis. Like you have a big goal at the beginning, like you have these questions you're trying to answer, and the SQL is just like one piece of like the puzzle potentially of how you're getting the answers for a stakeholder or somebody. And so that made a lot of sense to me. I mean, that's how so many things work, especially working as a technician.
That's so interesting because a lot of, yes, for every project that we do that you ever do in your life, in my opinion, but especially in the boot camp, we do a write up at the end, which is like almost like a blog post or like a formal report of what you did. And a lot of people hate it because it's like just a bunch of writing. But that's kind of what solidified a lot of stuff because you had to kind of explain what you were doing. And I think it's so easy to like follow a tutorial, follow a video, follow instructions and be like, okay, do this, do this, do this, do this. Then at the end, it's like, okay, now tell me why you did this and explain it in like a 1,200 word like report or article. That's kind of where a lot of learning happened for you. Is that what you're saying?
100%. I mean, that's what made LinkedIn posts easier because I felt like that's where the comprehension came in for me, full circle. Maybe that's not for everybody, but for me, when I had to sit down and actually write out what I comprehended from all of these steps in the project, it came full circle. And I was like, okay, I think I understand when I would use this in another project, because I understand, like, I'm explaining why I have to justify my steps, but it's laid out in a template because it's a course. And so when you have to kind of reverse engineer, I was like, well, why did Avery take this step? And you have to like write it out in your own summary, then you kind of understand, you come to understand it for yourself. That's was true for me.
I think there's I don't know the right word, like an effect or some sort of like, I listen to Ali Abdal a lot on YouTube, and he's like a productivity expert. And I just recently read his book, Feel Good Productivity. And he talks about like all these different things that have been studied. And one of them is that we actually learn the most by teaching. And so when we're kind of doing these articles, it's almost like I'm putting you into like a teaching mode. And I think you're right. I think that's where a lot of the learning happens. So that's super fascinating, that the technical learning happens in the technical sharing and the project sharing. And that's where growth can really grow. You also grew a lot in your network. Like, you no longer had just the gray little fake avatar of LinkedIn as a profile picture, but you souped up your LinkedIn page. You made it look really nice. You started posting on LinkedIn. You were always really consistent on posting on LinkedIn, and you started making connections, that like kind of random connections on LinkedIn. And I'm guessing that sometimes you're like, man, I don't know if these connections are ever going to pan out. I'm kind of just adding people on LinkedIn and I'm messaging them and trying to network, but it had to feel fruitless at some point.
It does feel like that. And maybe I don't know where I don't know why I adopted this mindset, or exactly why it was resonating with me so much, but I kind of knew that like building momentum was just being consistent with things. And if I stopped for a couple days, I have to start over. And that just kept me like in a rhythm, kind of like no matter what. So it would look like if I'd sit at my computer at the very beginning of the course, I was super focused on studying. So I would just sit at my computer to study. But later on, like later in the course, when I think I was always posting pretty consistently. So I'd probably sit down, post, start studying. And then later on, I would kind of sit down, network, like connect with people, send people messages, post, and then start studying. Like I always had that routine. And I just kind of kept to it no matter what I was doing in the day. If I didn't get to start studying till 8, 9, 10, I just like stayed up until I was like done what I needed to do. That was one of the like really hard parts, why I would stare at my computer super tired and probably just fall asleep on my keyboard because I was so determined. I mean, one of the things for me why I think the course was valuable is also the price. Funny enough, like I've heard other people say this now, and when I think about it retrospectively, it makes perfect sense. But since I had skin in the game, I wasn't going to waste it. Like I wasn't really just kidding around when I was like, oh yeah, like I paid for the course and it was like just no big deal. I was like, let's put together this money and bet on myself, right? So if I'm going to bet on myself, I want to look back after 12 months and be like, I gave it everything. I didn't go to bed early. I gave up all my gaming time, basically replaced it with study time. I'd stay up till midnight, 1 in the morning playing video games. So I thought, what's the difference? I'm just going to study, get it done.
I love that. I love that a lot because I'm the same way. Like, I'm obviously like, I'm not trying to break into data analytics, but I love physical adventures and physical challenges. So I recently just did an Ironman, which is like a really long triathlon. And like, there's no way in heck that like if I like was like, okay, yeah, I want to do a triathlon, and I didn't like pay the money and sign up for the race that day. And Ironmans are notoriously pretty expensive. If I like didn't pay the money, like I would not have done it, because there's something to be said about when you have skin in the game, where it's like, oh my gosh, I've paid money and I have to like see it through, in the end. And I think that is really true with data analytics as well. It's actually honestly one of the reasons, because there are like other boot camps out there that in the end are quite a bit more expensive than the accelerator program, but they're free at the beginning. And then you basically pay like anywhere between like 10 to 20% of your salary, like for like the first year or two. And for me, people have asked if I could like do that model. And for me, it's a no, because like I actually want people to improve. And I feel like when you do it that way, you don't have skin in the game at the beginning. And so you're not willing to stay up to midnight. You're not like willing to stop playing video games, because it's like, I don't know, you kind of have nothing to lose. So I really like that viewpoint for you. I think, going back to the momentum thing, the little steps that you took, Trevor, for you guys, Trevor is one of my most consistent students. He showed up to the live calls. He commented in the program. He asked me questions via DM in our community. He posted on LinkedIn. And like none of one of those single things was all that impressive. Like it's not like Trevor like one day like sent me the world's best DM or like posted the world's best LinkedIn post or anything like that. But like your small little steps got you like 1 inch closer every single time, and you just repeat that for for use for like 6 months, and boom, all of a sudden you're an overnight success. But it took you, no one can really see all the time that you put in. That is kudos to you, because not everyone does that, that's for sure.
Thank you, man. I appreciate that. I know you told me that I started the course in June, and so I broke into data in 6 months, but it really feels like I broke into data in 12 months because I started in January of like when I got my AI for Dummy books from the library is when my journey really started. So I don't know.
Uh,
It depends on where you're at. If you're listening to this and you're like, I feel like I'm been at this way longer or way less time. I think everything you go through will be valuable.
100%. Okay, so let's talk about it. You're networking on LinkedIn. And one of the things that we talk about, one of the strategies we talk about in the program is if you like see, like basically in order to land your first job in data, especially when you have no experience, especially when you have no degree, is you're going to have to lean more on like than just your skills. And so we have this thing called the SBN method, where S stands for skills, P stands for portfolio and projects, and N stands for network. And we try to really harp just as much on the projects and portfolios and networking as we do on the skills. And so one of the things that we talk about is if you find a job that you like, that you think it's a good role, you can always apply for it. But that's not really going to help you stand out. And when these companies are getting, dozens or hundreds or even thousands of applicants, you're like a needle in the haystack. And how can you stand out? So one of the things that we talk about is there's actually like, you can check that company page out on LinkedIn and see if there's any of your connections that work there. Or one of the things that we do is actually see if I have any connections that work there, and maybe I can introduce you to someone. And so you found a job that you thought might be a good fit for you. What was the job listing in Canada?
I don't think it was. No, I think it's technically a US company, but they have a Canadian office. But I don't think it was like, I think it was one of those listings that said either or, if I remember right.
Interesting.
Because it was a fully remote position. So I think you could be in Canada or the US. So it was North American wide, probably.
Wow. Okay, that's super interesting. So you found this job listing that you thought you might be a good fit for, and you actually checked out the company, and just randomly you were connected with someone that worked at the company. Is that right?
Yeah.
And what'd you do? Like, do you just like, okay, I'm just going to apply, or what was your next step?
Yeah. I applied right away. Always tried to get it was one of those other things. I had a rhythm. So I always tried to at least do a minimum of like 5 applications a day. So I was like doing that. And if I saw that I had a connection at that company, I also sent that person my resume and just saying like, hey, like, could you get me to the front of the line? I don't think I said that, but in a nice way, I was like, please help me out. It's not like we were best buddies or anything. It was just like he connected with me, liked my post one time. We both want to be in the same industry, so we're just connecting. They don't have to be super deep in order to be helpful.
The crazy thing though is I think a lot of people go wrong is they see the job posting and then they go try to find people to connect with, and then they're like, hey, can you help me get this job? But you had planted your seeds beforehand, where it was like you were already connected with this person. I don't know if you had messaged before, but like you had, like at least this person kind of knew who you were, and maybe you kind of knew who this person was. The point here is like you were watering your seeds well before you needed the harvest. And so when you actually, it was like, oh, it's, I need some fruit, you'd actually already put in like the gardening work to actually, get that up here. And so a little unclear like how it totally worked out in the end, but you ended up interviewing for this company and getting an offer.
It was 2 interviews and then a take-home project and then 2 more interviews and then got the offer.
Oh, that's pretty lengthy. What was the take home project like?
The take-home project was, I think, I'm trying to remember how to explain it. I remember it was like filling in a bunch of gaps. It was mostly SQL. I would say it was like a SQL project mostly. It was kind of like they had a Notion document. Like there was like, let's see if you can follow these instructions to bring this data that we have in this other file like into this database, and then pull this certain information from the database, like, and then do a little write up too. It was actually really interesting that part of the take home was to like explain your findings, kind of like write it out. Yeah. It was almost like a mini project. It was super funny.
Did you feel prepared for it?
Oh, dude, I felt so prepared.
See, that makes me so happy to hear, because that's like the goal, right? It's like One of the things I try to do is like mimic real life. And so it always makes me happy when there's take home projects like that. And you're like, oh, I've already done 9 of these. I know exactly what I'm doing. Ended up liking you and you ended up getting hired and you've been there for about 6 months. Is that right?
Yeah, yeah. A couple things I could say about the interview. I had to prepare a lot. Like, I definitely did not walk into the interview just super prepared and felt really good. Like when I was in a mode where I felt like I was getting a couple interviews, I would write down my questions. I would practice my questions. I would think through technical questions. I would practice on websites where there was practice questions. Like it's a whole nother step that once you're kind of finished getting your skills to like a level where you feel prepared, that you have to kind of prepare for interviews as well. And I don't think it was any particular piece of information that I did beforehand, but the preparation gives you confidence and it's kind of contagious a little bit. Like when you go in and you kind of feel like, okay, I feel prepared. I can take a deep breath. Like I've done all I can do. You're just more relaxed and you're more confident, even if it doesn't go well. That's kind of like where you want to get to. That's the ultimate goal. But I know one thing for my questions in particular, there's this strategy that I was implementing called like the best bits, and I had 5 of them, and some of them were about my portfolio project or about me personally, and it was kind of like whatever what I would actually practice is whatever behavioral question was asked, I would pivot it to one of my best bits, like that I already wanted to, like plan to talk about. So instead of practicing 20 different questions, like the answer to 20 questions, I had 5 answers and I was going to give 5 answers. Didn't matter what they were going to ask. And so I practiced ways to pivot that wasn't weird. Like if they were like, tell me about yourself, it's like, oh, that's a great question. It starts here. Or they're like, tell me a situation where you had issues and you overcame it. I was like, phenomenal question. Recently, I was building my portfolio and I ran into a bunch of issues with the code and trying to build it on GitHub Pages. And I was had all these issues and yada, yada, yada. Got to explain like a cool story and I was prepared for it. So it didn't matter like what it was. I was going to bring it back to what I wanted to talk about.
Isn't that so powerful when you can take an interview and almost flip it on its head? And when you're like, no, I'm driving the interview now, not you. And yeah, preparing those stories is really key, right? Because those behavioral questions, they're really just looking for you to answer with the STAR method: situation, task, action, result. And if you can really just be like, okay, I have 5 star answers, I'm going to figure out how to use them in the interview no matter what. I think that's so powerful. So I'm sure you nailed it. Yeah, it sounds like 4 rounds of interviews and a take-home project. That had to be a little bit of like little grueling process, but you came out on the other side victorious.
Yeah, it's definitely stressful. Every time you're waiting for a callback and waiting to hear something, wondering how it goes, it's a stressful process.
It's not fun. And the crazy thing is like you could do all that work and then not get the offer. And you could be inches away from getting the role, which is, and you don't really know a lot of the times because not often they tell you, oh yeah, like you are a second option. That's pretty frustrating. So what does a typical day look like for you now? Like for example, like today or maybe a day last week, like what time like do you usually like start working? Like do you have like a stand-up meeting? Those types of things.
Yeah, I actually had never really heard the word stand up before getting my job, and then it seems like it's really common because I've heard other people say it. But yeah, we do the stand up, do like a check in like every morning, and we kind of go over what we're working on for the day or what we worked on the previous day. And for me, a typical day, like what my role involves is we have like the data analyst team who are building custom like data products, usually dashboards for the customers. And if they notice something about the data, they bring it to our team and we will take it to the developers or the data engineers and figure out a way to maybe transform it different or add validation rules to fix it. And so sometimes the data analysts will ask for like new columns and more data, and we will create columns and stuff like that. The data engineers will, and we'll kind of validate it and look at it. So I spend the chunk of my day either like validating or looking into issues around data specifically.
Very cool. You're kind of like almost like an auxiliary analyst where you're kind of bridging the gap between a different team of data analysts and like the data and the data engineers, just helping them make sure that they're all in agreement and making sure everything is looking right.
Yeah, it's totally like that. And didn't know this role would be as fun as it is. And I think it fits me really well. And I love the exposure that I get to like different teams.
Interesting. So it's fun. What's fun about it?
I think it's fun because like you kind of get to see all these different aspects going on. And for me, it's fun because, especially because it's still new, that there's so much that I'm still learning. So I get to talk and hear about what the machine learning team is doing and like the projects they're working on. And even though it's super high level for me, it's super interesting to hear about it, just to be involved like in the meetings. Because I'm kind of an intermediator, I think what's fun is I get to sit in like a lot of meetings. So, and I'm not even like the person that they're looking to or giving a lot of feedback right now because I don't have a lot of seniority. So it's fun for me to sit back and learn and have like all this exposure.
That is one of the coolest and most fun parts about a data career. Early in the boot camp, I say like the 5 reasons you should have a data career. One of them is it's fun and you never stop learning. That's the other thing is it's like you're always constantly learning, which I think is fun. I think you think is fun as well. That's so good. I'm glad to hear it's fun. What tools do you use a lot of? You using like Excel, like SQL type of things?
I use SQL the most. We use a dbeaver as like, I guess it's just like the UI tool that uses SQL primarily. And then I use Hex a fair amount. It's like a notebook tool that's kind of like online and it's easy to share stuff and like collaborate with it. So it's a little bit, I think it's a little bit nicer to use than Jupyter. And on top of that, I got to use Nime, which I've never really used something like Nime, but it
Yeah.
was kind of an alternative or a competitor to Alteryx. So that's been super fun because I I love doing transformations like with like the visual nodes. Like you kind of
Yeah.
just put all these nodes, you bring in data, and you can do so many transformations to something. So I do a lot of troubleshooting like with Nime and transformations with Nime. So I get to build these little mini pipelines or little transformations like within Nime. And sometimes I've actually built like automated workflows where we actually schedule it and it runs. And so a lot of times there'll be like a project that kind of pops up and someone's like, I think we need this automated or we need this done. And if I take it on, I just get to kind of play around in Nime until I figure it out.
That's one thing I want to highlight to people is like you didn't know Nime before you got this job. And guess what? You don't have to know everything before you land your first data job. Like Trevor says, you can kind of just play with stuff until you figure it out on the job. Or oftentimes, companies have internal trainings about stuff like this, or they'll even pay to teach you stuff like this. Like they'll pay for you to go to like a certificate or like have a course or something like that. So you don't have to know everything when you're landing that first data job. I think that's brilliant.
There's one note that I made that my first week on the job, I wanted to say that like how much support I got because a lot of people think that they have to know everything before they get started. And then my first week, all I did was just study. Like they gave me the ropes to just be like, no, just learn. And they gave me like a Google Doc with like Zoom recordings, and they're like, yeah, just get caught up. Like just watch all our like Zoom recordings of all these meetings, so you kind of understand the lingo and what we're doing, and just had so much support. So it really comes back to I think if you get out of the course and out of all that's studying, like the confidence to learn and the confidence to like articulate your analysis, that's like really a foundation of all you need. And then the nuanced, you can learn it at like the nuanced of your job. Like it'll be so specific. Trying to learn everything will not work. You can't remember everything. That's the tricky part.
That's a good point because even on Alex Sanchez's episode, he asked his manager, he's like, what can I do in the first week? You know? And the manager looked at him and he was like, you can just like sit back and relax and we'll talk about how you're doing like after like 90 days. Like don't fret about the first week. So yeah, that first week a lot of the time is figuring out what the heck you're doing, just meeting your coworkers, getting access to the software you need, getting access to the data that you need. That still takes even before we started, you were talking and you're like, I need some access to some data I haven't gotten access to before I can move on to this next stage in my analysis. So yeah, that first week is kind of, I don't want to say boring, but maybe not as action packed as people might imagine it.
I thought it was great because that's when I learned Nime. I was like, I knew Nime was going to be a tool, and I was like, haven't used it, so I was taking. I got access to Nime, and because I had an account, I could go on their online portal. I think it might actually be free because I think Nime is like one of
Yeah,
the
they have an open source version
they
of
have
it.
an open source, but they have tons of like training programs on their website. So I just like started on their first one and just went through like all their courses and learned how to use it basically.
I want to transition here to talk about another thing that you're doing right now, which is pretty exciting, where you're actually helping with the Data Analytics Accelerator program. You're one of our new coaches to the DAA bootcamp, and you're helping me with students, and they're transforming their career. Tell me why you were willing to do that when I asked you to.
Yeah, I think touch back to when that first comment I said, I was like, I really wanted to make changes in my life. And then it came full circle. I stuck with it and it worked out for me. And the fact that so many things changed for the better, for the positive for me, just gives me like a heart and just really want to help like other students, like other people. I don't think people give themselves enough credit. Like they get started and they feel like they're missing something or they don't have the confidence. And what's if you actually decide that you want to make changes in your life and do something about it, I mean, you're so much farther ahead than so many other people. Just I know so many people that complain about their career that they've been at for 15 years and they just don't do anything about it. So the fact that you're willing to actually get up and do something about it and try to make your life better, I want to be a part of that and help like those people who've raised their hand and said like I want to make things better. So if I can help in any way, that's exciting. And students are incredible. Like they're such hardworking people. They're so dedicated. You build such a phenomenal community and around people who are very caring and helpful and wanting to learn. So I'm grateful I can be a part of it.
Hey, we're grateful to have you. We do have some incredible students, and a lot of what you do with DAA is like one of the things you've been doing that I love that you've been doing is we have like this community that's very similar to Discord or Slack, this private community, and you'll just say, hey guys, like I'm in the live room if anyone wants to chat, like like if any of you guys need like advice or you're stuck with something, like I'm here. You're like pretty much there like once a day. You can say hello to me, but you're also like responding to people's comments, making sure that they don't have any questions, taking office hours, kind of just sharing everything that you've learned from the boot camp and also your new job and just trying to transport that knowledge into their brains. I guess what's one of the things that like you're looking forward to down the road in this realm of helping with DA?
Yeah, one thing I'd be looking forward to is like I mean, helping making improvements to the course. I love that you kind of extended that instead of wanted my perspective. So I'm excited to see how we can make it even better and more streamlined for people because people have such a diverse background and they're in so many different stages. And I would love to take people from whatever they're doing and bring them into like the world of data. And so if it can really be accessible to as many people as possible and people feel like the steps are really laid out in a way that they can understand it no matter like where they're starting at, that would be the true like that'd be incredible if we could get there.
I agree. That's the goal. That's the mission. I was gonna say like maybe like one of your goals would be like seeing someone that like you like saw from like beginning to end land their data job. You basically started working in February. And there's been a few people that have gone through the program since February landed jobs. Krishna, who was somehow on the podcast before you, was about that range. I think he joined in January. And I actually had him talk to you when he joined because he was from the same area as you. And now he's killing it, landed that first data job and really enjoying it. You've already been doing good work, which is quite awesome. So everyone, connect with Trevor. Add him on LinkedIn. We'll have his LinkedIn in the show notes down below, and you guys can connect with him on LinkedIn. And if you guys are interested in kind of going through a journey similar to Trevor, we'll have a link to the same webinar that Trevor went through at the beginning to kind of kick this whole thing off. And then maybe you'll end up joining the accelerator program and hanging out with Trevor in office hours and talking to him there. Trevor, thank you so much for joining the podcast.
Thank you, Avery. Have a great day, man.